not really reserving these for the family of the candidates. If anyone.
We got a couple of seats up here too, if anybody needs a seat.
Nobody wants to front row. Give a break.
Okay, we'll go for it. Thank you all for coming. The first question I have is, can everyone hear okay?
Yes.
Okay, because, good, okay, I have a sound system set up. We'd rather not use it if we don't have to. I think all three of the cameras talk loud enough, but if we have to use it, we can just plug it in and use that, so let me know, okay? I want to thank you all for coming. I want to especially thank the three candidates for showing up. I know it was a long drive for some of you, and we do really appreciate this coming up to good old Hot Springs. I feel like I need to explain a little bit about how this forum started, and the reason is I got a call yesterday from one of the candidates, and he said, I got a call from a friend of mine who said, you're not going to that Hot Springs forum, are you? It's just those hippies up there are trying to ambush you, is all it is. Those hippies up there trying to get you, right? Well, no, the hippies up here aren't trying to get any of the candidates. I'm sure that wasn't the case at all. So I'll give you just a brief background. I know you don't want to hear me, you want to hear them, but I feel I need to give you a brief background of how this happened. I'm Rube Reitzman. I've been in law enforcement years ago, okay, and I was called by, I believe the two organizers would be Niska Worthen and Shelley Eisenrich, okay? And Niska called me about a week and a half ago, something like that, and said they were trying to get a forum together at the Grange for the sheriff's candidates, and would I be interested in writing some questions for the sheriff's candidates, especially pertinent to law enforcement questions, and especially to the Sanders County Sheriff's Office law enforcement questions. And I said, I can do that. So I started working on some questions, and we went back and forth on a couple of calls and talked about a format, also what kind of a format would benefit the public the best. And we finally decided, the two of us, I believe Shelley might have had some input on coming up with a format a little bit different and some questions that are a little bit different. So I will read to you and to the candidates our format, okay? Oh, by the way, I wasn't scheduled to be the moderator. I came here today and said, who's your moderator? And they said, you are. I said, oh, really? Okay, I didn't know that. So,
I told you that the other day.
So this was not planned either, but here is the format for the sheriff candidates forum. It will be a little bit different than the formats you've seen in the past. I'm sure most of you have been in forums before, and quite often what happens is someone will ask a question of one of the candidates, that candidate will answer, and the other candidates will kind of piggyback on that answer that the first one has answered. And so by the time you leave, everyone has sounded kind of the same. At least that seems to be my impression often what happens. This will be a little bit different, okay? We're going to start out, and we're going to have each candidate take approximately 5 minutes and introduce themselves, give, maybe explain who they are, their background, their training and experience in law enforcement, what agencies they have worked for in the past and why they left those agencies, what they hope to accomplish as sheriff or why they are running, and any other pertinent information that they choose to give. So approximately 5 minutes. And then we have a magic little jar here that I've written up 24 questions that are very pertinent to the sheriff's office. And the way I did this, back when I was under sheriff, one of the first jobs I got assigned by the sheriff was to come up with a hiring process for deputies, to rewrite the interviews and come up with a totally new form of what we were doing. So I went to a lot of training for that, and I wrote the interview questions, and that's how I've treated these questions today. They're going to be quite a bit different than some of the other questions you've heard in various formats. These questions are going to be rather formulated as if the three people here were applying for the job as sheriff, because essentially that's what they're doing. And you, of course, are the hiring board, okay? So that's how we're going to approach this, that we were asking the same questions that I would ask a candidate who was running or who was applied to be the office of sheriff in Sanders County. So they're going to be very law enforcement specific. They might be a little confusing to some of you, but I've written them, I hope I've written them in a way that you can understand them, okay? And then at a certain time, or when the questions are exhausted, I doubt they will be, we will have a break, maybe 5, 5:20, 5:30, something like that, okay? And then we'll kind of divide the candidates up, and you can walk around and talk to the candidates. You can ask them questions. The questions we're asking here are very law enforcement specific. They're not political, they're not social, they're not cultural. Some of you may have those kind of questions. So you're free to walk around after we're done here at 5:30 or 5:20 and ask questions to the candidates if they're acceptable to that, okay? Because one of the great things is you get to meet the candidates. And this is a sacred process. As far as I know, the United States is the only country that still gets to vote for their law enforcement officers. I don't know any others, do you? No. And not everyone in the United States does. Some states, either the sheriff's office like Kentucky are only process servers, they're not really full law enforcement officers. Some states I don't even know if they have a sheriff's office at all. So this is kind of a sacred thing we're doing. It's been around a long time, and we're one of the few places that are left to do it. So I think everybody's going to be very polite and honorable and treat the candidates with the respect they deserve for this, because it is a sacred honor. So thank you for coming, okay? So, I don't know if you just want to start in order and give your talk. Is that okay? Okay.
So my name is Manny Hensley. I'm currently with Sanders County Sheriff's Office. I've been with our Sheriff's Office here since 2011. Come July 1st, I'll have 31 years in law enforcement. I started off in a little place called Sublette County, Wyoming. It's the Pinedale, Big Piney area. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that, but it's a long ways from nowhere. I started off with that Sheriff's Office, and in 1995 I started there. And in 1998, my buddy, the highway patrol officer, told me how great the highway patrol was and that I should apply with them and join the highway patrol, so I did. And they sent me right back to the same county I'd been a deputy. So I stayed there for 6 more years, and then ended up transferring to Cody, Wyoming, which is kind of where I'd grown up, and I worked there for 6 years. I decided the highway patrol was, their retirement system was kind of wacky down there. And I kind of missed the work of doing work for the sheriff's office. You know, I missed the people and the variety and stuff, and so told my wife, I said, I want to go back to work for a sheriff's office, and her first words is, I'm not going back to Big Piney. And so I said, well, I'm a Montana native. I want to move back to Montana. I had grown up in Wyoming from the time I was 4 on, but I was actually born in Miles City. So I started looking at sheriff's offices in Montana that were rural, because that's what I liked, is the rural style of law enforcement. And I applied with Sanders County and got hired. I started at the beginning of February in 2011, and Rube was my boss at the time. And about 18 months into that, Rube retired, and he and Tom called me in the office one day, and I thought, oh, great, what now? And Tom says, well, Rube's gonna retire as the undersheriff, and he goes, would you be interested in the position? And so I said yes, and I wound up holding that position for a little over 10 years, till the end of 2022, and then when Sheriff Fielders got elected, Jerry Johnson took my place as undersheriff, and I went back to patrol. During the time I was the undersheriff, I did get a lot accomplished as far as things that needed to move the agency forward. We needed laptops in our vehicles. I made that happen. In order to do that, we had to change our records management system over to be compatible with that. I made that happen. In 2022, during the whole COVID shortage of vehicles, 2 of our replacement vehicles I were told that I was going to have to pay retail for because the dealers weren't doing fleet stuff. Ended up having to buy 2 used trucks on Auto Trader. The 2 white Fords that you see in our fleet are the ones that I got. Got them back to Sanders County, and the county mechanic said, oh, we got reassigned to the road crew, we can't set your trucks up. So that year I ended up setting up those 2 trucks in my driveway. The light bars, the sirens, the radios, cages, everything. I did that. So, you know, I've got the experience, I can think outside the box. Both of my children went to school and graduated Thompson Falls High School. My son's in the Army now, stationed in Germany. My daughter just graduated college. My wife has worked in the financial sector over there for, well, almost since 2012. And so, we're invested in this community. And, being a patrol officer, I see all parts of our county. And when I was the undersheriff, I used to spend a good portion of my shifts on the road patrolling also. And so, what I have to offer is, if you elect me, I want to be a proactive sheriff out in the community working with people, and I have the experience and the knowledge to back that. So, appreciate your vote. Thanks.
Thanks, Lynn.
Thank you. Okay. Sure.
Hi, I'm Chris Reyna. I think I know almost everyone here. There's a few people I don't. I was born in Texas, but I moved here in 2010 after my parents moved here in 2009. In 2016, I became a peace officer in Plains, Montana, and I worked there until 2023. And in 2019, I met the love of my life, Italia. She's here, and we ended up having 4 beautiful children in about 5 years. It was pretty crazy because the last set were twins, or the last time we had kids, it was twins. Things didn't go exactly as expected in 2022, so I ended up going to work in construction while I was still working for the PD. And in 2023, I left Plains Police Department. One of the reasons we decided to settle here in Plains, in this Sanders County, was because I knew I could protect my kids here. I knew I could raise them here and it'd be a safe place. I don't feel that same way anymore. Since then, I've seen this county become more divided. I've heard people from east to west about unresolved cases, including my deepest concern for Heather Tift, who went missing in Hot Springs in 2021, and there was no investigation ever started. An official, actual investigation. So I'm running to restore real response, real justice, and real trust in the sheriff's office. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Hello everybody, I'm John Pillars. Some of you know, some may not. I'm the current sheriff of Sanders County. I'm going to show my age. I started in law enforcement in 1986 as a reserve deputy for Lynn County, Oregon. Don't hold that against me, please. But I went from a reserve deputy to a full-time deputy in short order, and I did my entire 27-year career with that same county. I started at the bottom, worked my way through all the ranks, got to do all kinds of different specialty assignments, anywhere from looking for warrants, a fugitive recovery, to forest patrol, marine patrol. Ended up as a sergeant, road sergeant. I got on the SWAT team, and by the time I finally did retire after 27 years, I was a SWAT team commander and senior road sergeant. So I spent the entire time on the road. I was never in an office, which really drives me nuts now, by the way. I finally retired. My wife was also a deputy for the same county. She worked in the corrections division. And I had some time left before she could retire and move out here. We planned to move to Montana for years. We had some friends that lived out here. We'd been here, we loved it, and we wanted to get away from Oregon more than anything. So I went over to Iraq. I'd been there once before. I was a contractor, military contractor, and I was there until 2020. Got back just in time as COVID was hitting. I was the last flight out of Iraq. The rest of those poor guys were stuck there for months and months and months before they were able to fly out. So we'd already bought our place in Montana. My lovely wife managed all the paperwork while I was gone, so I had this really nice place to come back to. So much for retirement. I was encouraged by multiple people at duty to run for sheriff. It was a pretty tumultuous time, you might say, in the last election. And so, okay, I ran it, and here I am. We put Jerry, my undersheriff, we put our nose to the grindstone, and we've accomplished a lot. It's always a challenge. Money is always an issue. There's only so much money in the pot, so you make the best with what you get. It doesn't mean you can't fight for every nickel that you can get. And that's my mission in life. I'm laser focused on the office, the community. I tell people I wasn't born here. I don't have the credits to say I'm a native, but I'm going to die here. This is the last great place, and there's nowhere left to go. So we've gained a lot of ground. I mean, after we're done with this section, we've made a punch list of all the accomplishments that we've been able to do, and I would like to continue doing that. job's not finished yet, so I hate to leave it hanging, you might say. We're on a roll and we're doing pretty good. So, in a nutshell, here I am now. I've got over 30 years, 3 years as a sheriff. First few years is a learning curve for anybody that's going to be sheriff. And then you have to build the trust of your people, and that's a challenge in itself. And do a weeding here and there, you might say, to make things work. But I'm here to answer your questions afterwards, or I guess even during.
Thank you, Sheriff. Look at the question part. We have a hermetically sealed magic jar here. If a genie comes out of this, I get first wish, by the way, okay? So we'll start with the sheriff since we started over here. And each candidate will answer, only one candidate will answer the question that they drew. And that way the others aren't just, parroting the answer or criticizing or something like that. And the 24 questions, I think we have enough to keep everybody busy for a while. So we will take your questions in the magic jar and give it your best for everyone. Oh, read it to the audience, please.
Okay, can you explain a Terry stop? What a Terry stop is and how it relates to probable cause and particularized suspicion. Terry stop is basically when you have somebody that hair's going up on the back of your neck, things like, I need to talk to that person. A Terry stop is when you're going to stop and do a field interview. Basically, you're not arresting that person, you're not detaining that person, so if you're doing a Terry stop, you're going to, hey, you got a minute, can I talk to you? And if they tell you to go pound sand, you're pretty much going to leave it at that. Surprisingly enough, most of the time they'll stop, say, yeah, what do you need? And then as you start building questions and whatnot, you can actually come up with probable cause to then hold that person there for more in-depth conversation. But a Terry stop is just literally, hey, how you doing today? What's going on? That kind of thing. But police officers, after a certain amount of time, will get to the point where there's something wrong with that scenario. They're just in the wrong place at the wrong time. What are they doing out here at 2 o'clock in the morning behind the building, type of thing. So those are people you want to stop and talk to. So I think that pretty well covers that. Particularly the suspicion, I mean, that's not probable cause, that's suspicion. But that also builds to probable cause. So as you go from the Terry, you get into more suspicion, and then if you get probable cause, then they very likely may end up in the arrest or at least holding people until you get the questions answered that you want.
Thank you. Okay, choose, Chris.
Rub it first. Says, sheriffs are public figures. What is your training, experience, and level of ability at public speaking, explaining policies and critical or controversial incidents to the public and the media? I'd say I'm a better investigator than I am a politician. So this is my experience public speaking and the past meet and greets I've done this year, basically. I think I'm probably pretty good at explaining policies, critical or controversial incidents, because I know how to withhold information that's private and talk about the incident itself. And I definitely know how to communicate through the media or online with anything like that would be typed out. But as speaking, I would be prepared to do a press conference if there was some sort of serious incident before all the media got there. So I don't know if that's a good answer or good one.
Any answer is a good answer.
Did I answer
That's
that
what
way?
the hiring board is here for, I guess, to decide that. Right?
Did I answer the question you?
Yeah, I think you did, yeah. Not for me to judge, it's just, yeah.
Describe the concept of reasonable and prudent and how it relates to law enforcement. I am very much a proponent of spirit of the law versus letter of the law. I think, especially in rural law enforcement, just because you can issue a citation to somebody for every tiny little infraction, does that mean necessarily you have to? No. You know, reasonable and prudent, I think that all boils down to officer discretion. And I think officer discretion is one of the most sacred things we have in our culture in law enforcement in this day and age that doesn't exist in a lot of other places in the world, because they don't have that level of discretion. They can't make those kind of decisions because of the way they're structured, whether it's they're part of the military, they're part of a federalized police force or whatever. We're unique because, you know, like was said earlier, we elect our law enforcement with sheriff's offices. And I think the sheriff, his role in this is making sure that he has an agency that cultivates good officer discretion. And so these officers are out enforcing the law with the level of discretion that is appropriate for that community. Would I, if, you know, my style of law enforcement and the way I take care of problems and handle things probably would never fly in Seattle or Denver, because it's rural law enforcement. And so when you get officers that come here from bigger agencies, you have to be careful of that, because, you know, we live with each other, we work with each other, we see each other at the grocery store or the doctor's office or the post office. And so we need to be consistent and have respect, but we also need to be aware of how reasonable and prudent fits within what we're doing.
Can you tell us about MACO, the Montana Association of Counties? What their function is and how you will use their resources to help the Sanders County Sheriff's Office. MACO is basically our insurance company. Give people that when we say we got sued, and if you're doing your job, you're gonna get sued, it happens. MACO's the one that come in and go to bat for you. MACO's also a huge. Louder? Okay, sorry.
Yeah, just a little bit.
MACO's they are a great sounding board when we have questions of, okay, how are we going to do this? Should we do this? Dealing with personnel. If we have a personnel issue, it's like, you know, this is going on, should we go, we're thinking about disciplinary action. What's your recommendation on how to go about that? These are the people that we talk to so we don't get ourselves in a pickle and get sued worse. But basically, MACO is the one that insures the county and the sheriff's office especially. And as far as using them, we do it regularly. I mean, we're contacting them, asking them, you know, what's the best way forward, what's the best legal way forward, so we don't do something that will get us in a bind.
Thank you.
It says, what is your experience with public events or incidents such as protests, forest fires, floods, multi-vehicle accidents, search and rescue operations, and so forth? I don't think we've ever had a protest here. The biggest thing was when people were protesting in front of Simple Simon's Pizza in Plains. That was a couple of years ago. And I was able to talk to them about the law and the easement and where they could be at and where they couldn't be at. When they violated that, I talked to them and ended up having to arrest one because he didn't stay off the property, but I get along with those people fine now. And they worked it out with Simple Simon Pizza. It went away, actually. It's a new pizza place. Forest fires, I've experienced being evacuated and how they do roadblocks, and I don't like the way they do roadblocks. I think it was really inefficient blocking the road from people evacuating more so than coming in. I think that could be improved if that ever happens again, and people having access to their property. And that's something the sheriff's office does take part in and evacuate people. One person, Bob Abel, actually told me that, you know, the VFW and Knox and everyone knows everyone in these VFWs, and they can help evacuate people because they're gonna know everybody in that community, whereas we might not, because we're not in every place. I'd like to try to be in every place though. Floods, we haven't had too many floods. There was a flood in Plains once where the river crossed the road, and it wasn't too much of an ordeal. Multi-vehicle accidents, I've responded to multiple accidents over the years, and usually I was the first one on scene, and I was able to address the situation and communicate with the ambulance or anyone that was en route and let them know what was going on. I think Laney has too. Search and rescue operations. I've helped search for people. I have not actually been part of search and rescue in the sheriff's office, but I would like to improve that. I think that's all it's asking for is my experience though, so that's about it, I think.
Tell us what the different levels of post police officer standards and training is, what that stands for. There are, and what your level is, either Montana or another state. Actually, on that table back there is all my certificates, and you can see those for yourself, but I'll just go through them. At a peace officer level, there's basic, intermediate, and advanced. And beyond that, there can be supervisory, command, and administrative, and I have all 6 of those. There's certain time you have to be on to get those certifications. And then there's certain amount of hours that go with that experience to get to the next level. I was also in Wyoming, I had reached professional level of certification, which is same as our advanced here. When I moved to Montana, I took what was called the equivalency test. So I went through the 2-week equivalency course, which is where Montana agrees to recognize your post-training if you're from another state. And I had been through Peace Officer Basic, Detention Officer Basic, and the Highway Patrol Officer Basic in Wyoming. And I think when I added those all up one time, it came to 36 weeks of basic training. Montana recognized that after I went through the EQ class, because Montana and Wyoming are very, very similar with the way their state statutes are set up. There was a few nuances with Montana, and that's what they go over in that equivalency course.
Can you tell us about CJIN, Criminal Justice Information Network, and how much training and experience you have at working with it? Well, it happened until I became sheriff, but the training in it, you have to be certified. You have to take basically it's an online class. You have to go through and do the reading on it and take a test, and you have to do that regularly. I think it's yearly. But what that does is our computer files, they're not for the public. So basically you have to take a security test and whatnot, so what you can and cannot give to the general public, and what you just can't talk about. So basically like our office, if you're going to be in the office unescorted, you have to be CJIN certified just to walk through the office alone. Because there's going to be paperwork, investigations on desks and things like that. So CJIN is something that it's all criminal justice information, and it's not for the newspaper. Let's put it this way: it's type of information that's for criminal justice purposes, and it's not to be released to the general public. So everybody in my office, in most police agencies as well, have to be CJIN certified in order to look at that material.
It says, can you describe the National Crime, or it says NCIC, National Crime Information Center, and what role it plays in law enforcement? Basically that, when you talk to dispatch and they run something through CJIN, they're the agency that has all that information and sends it out. I know when they go down, it's a real problem if you're on a traffic stop, because you don't know anything about the person you're stopping, if they have a license, this kind of thing. But it's almost exactly kind of what he was talking about, CGIM, they're just on top of all that, so.
What is the role of POST, Police Officer Standards and Training Council, and how much experience have you had in dealing with them? So the previous question I had, POST oversees officer training and certification within the state of Montana. They set the standards of how much training, refresher training you have to go to keep certified, once you're certified. And then as an administrator, you have a certain amount of time when you hire somebody, you have to fill out the paperwork and send that into POST so they can add them to the POST rosters. And then, so I've had that experience in dealing with them, arranging training with them, and then also, you know, when there was disciplinary actions come up or complaints against officers, I would consult with POST on those issues as well. When there's a complaint on an officer, a lot of times, somebody will send it to POST instead of whatever law enforcement agency the complaint is made in. POST will usually refer it back to the administrator of that agency first to review it, determine if there's any merit, and then have POST do an independent investigation on their own. But they are the role of POST governs the certifications of peace officers in the state. That's their primary role. And they set the standards for those different levels and how many hours are required to get them and maintain them.
Sheriffs often end up as an incident commander.
Louder.
Sheriffs often end up as incident commanders, sometimes on multi-agency, multi-jurisdictional incidents. What is your training experience in NIMS, National Incident Management System, and ICS, Incident Command System? At what level of incident command have you been trained? I've actually done a lot. I'll go back to Force Patrol. I was in charge of almost every search and rescue operation. We had what they call the triad, where 3 different counties came together in the Mount Washington wilderness area. And so we ended up very often had 3 different counties to herd, you might say, like herding cats. But, so I was designated, it started in Lynn County where I used to work. I was in charge of the incident commander and PIO and all the brass left. As far as multi-jurisdictional as well, we had, back to the question of protests, we had a huge amount of timber protests. It's still on video on YouTube, I believe, where we had thousands of people show up and hug trees and chain themselves to them and do all kinds of crazy things. So I've been incident commander on several of those. And then, as I said before, I retired as SWAT team commander. And so we had multiple incidents where I was totally in direct charge of that. And we brought in other teams. They all fell under my jurisdiction as far as leading those who was in charge on that. So I'm very familiar. I've also been to the Inland School for Search and Rescue, put on by the Coast Guard. It's an extensive school, it's an 80-hour class, basically, 2 weeks. Everywhere from map reading to down aircrafts to you name it. So I've had a lot of experience in incident command.
What is your training and experience in writing or managing grants? I've done 1 grant for my business during COVID, and then I also did a high visibility grant for Plains Police Department. I think it was 2017 or maybe 2018. That's my experience. I have written 2 grants.
Sometimes the sheriff has to act as a PIO, public information officer, Can you tell us the role of a public information officer, the legal obligations of the public's right to know versus the legal restrictions of the criminal justice information and someone's right to privacy? The role of a public information officer, it ties in with the transparency that goes with what we need in law enforcement. You know, and I'll use forest fires. That's the one that comes to mind readily for me because I've done 7 of them. I think I was 6 or 7 forest fires, and you know when the sheriff was gone, a few of those times when the fires would start, I had to relay information out. The obligations, the legal obligations of the public's right to know versus the restrictions of criminal justice. You cannot, as they talked about earlier, criminal justice information, anything that involves an active investigation, any kind of personal identifiable information on somebody, you can't release that kind of stuff, or juveniles. But you have to be able to convey any kind of an incident out. Say if you had a shooting, or which we've had a couple of homicides when I was the undersheriff. You know, we had to get that information out, but you have to be careful about, you know, you can't let any facts of the case get in there. You have to screen that out as you're releasing this information. One of the other ones is fatal incidents like vehicle crashes. You got to be very careful with releasing information until you've gone through the steps with the coroner's office to make sure that the families of the deceased are notified and things like that. You don't want somebody finding out they lost a loved one in a crash from a Facebook post. I mean, it's a lot of it's just common sense and professional etiquette. You just think of how would you feel when you're releasing this information. How would you feel if your friends or loved ones or family was involved in this? And you accidentally brought that in, or if it was a case they were involved in. And you've got to know what the CJIN rules are in order to be able to adhere to those and not violate them when you're releasing that information.
What is your training and experience in handling public sector budgets and the laws regarding them? Well, I spent the last 3 years working with budgets, but even prior to that, I had to work the budget for my previous SWAT team. The previous SWAT team was 40 people, and the budget was almost 3 times larger than the budget I have now. I think I spent more than that over the SWAT team than we have budgeted for the sheriff's office here. So I have quite a bit of experience, but again, pot's only so big. So I was told multiple times I need to trim my budget a little bit and tuck in the edges. Here, it's always going to be a battle. It's a matter of priorities and whatnot. I'll always fight for as much as I can possibly get because I believe in giving the people of this county the best public safety as I can possibly give them. So I ruffle feathers here and there, but I will always fight to get the most I can as far as that's concerned. The budget, once it's set, you just got to be, it's no different than at home. You get a certain amount of money, you can make it last a year. And so you need to be a little frugal with it at first in case strange things happen, things break down, and major incidents happen where you have to spend money that you weren't expecting. So you always want to make sure there's something in the pot to fall back on if you need to. And you don't do any major spending until you get to the end and you think you're safe to do that. And then you try not to spend it to zero. But I've had quite a bit of experience in the budgeting aspect as far as that's concerned.
The Sanders County Jail holds between 20 and 30 prisoners, and the sheriff is responsible for its operation. What is your experience in managing a detention center? I don't have any experience managing a detention center, but I do have experience with detention and the jail and a lot of the officers here. I know a lot have been replaced, but I understand how most things work there, and I've actually went in and helped restrain when a male whenever there was only a female working and he had been using drugs. I know how to manage people. I don't know what else I can say for that though. I'll try to answer my questions fast because people seem bored.
What are the MCA, Montana Code annotated requirements to become a deputy sheriff, and under what circumstances and procedure can they be terminated from their job? Without looking exactly at the MCA, I can't tell you exactly what all of them are, but I can say what some of the big ones are. Misconduct, that can include any criminal act that's committed on duty, serious infractions of policy, mishandling evidence. The circumstances and procedure that they can be terminated, those are set forth a lot by your agency's policies. But there are some, you have Montana Code annotated, which that's the statutory requirements for the job. So you've got to be a citizen, you can't be a felon, you have to be able to handle siege and information, and I think you have to be over 21 years of age. And you have to be certifiable. You have to meet all the physical requirements that the academy sets forward to get your certification. The termination part, it's case specific. So, there could be a pattern of things that an agency decides to terminate for, or it could be one big thing that an agency decides to terminate for. They may they may call MACO for guidance on that, because they want to protect the county from a wrongful termination. So you would get your guidance from MACO and from your county attorney on those things. But like I said, the big ones, anything criminal is pretty much going to be a fireable offense. And then you have your ethical things that are going to be fired. If you've got officers that are treating people differently in the public in exchange for breaks on speeding tickets or cases, or things like that, those are things they can be fired for. There's just a lot of things there. You have your MCA, which determines that, but you also have your administrative rules of Montana. They call them ARMS. Those are more specific with peace officers and the criteria to dismiss them and remain qualified as well. So a lot of it's going to be, my basic answer to that would be just case specific, but I know where to look to find the answers.
Can you describe the use of force continuum and when different levels of force are justified? Well, the first level is presence. There's several different levels, and you can go from presence, going up to talking to somebody, all the way to the top that quick, depending on what happens. But then, basically, the force continuum is what is reasonable. So if we go up and talk to you, just your command presence, that's actually the first level of show force. Next is that you have to put hands on somebody or give them orders or commands. And then it goes all the way up to lethal force. And they break it down into a force continuum, and what happens a lot of times is new officers especially get kind of wrapped around the axle. It's like, oh man, I gotta check that one off, and I gotta check this one off, and check that one off before I can get up to here. So it takes a lot of training, and the training is huge when it comes to the force continuum, because like I said, you're out talking to somebody and they all of a sudden reach for a gun. Where do you go from there? You skip 2 through 9 and you go right to 10. But there is a continuum, there's reasonable levels of force. You know, basically they go fisticuffs, well, we go with a taser or a baton. You know, they pull a knife, we go right to the gun, and there's several in between there. But there's a force continuum that you have to abide by, and that's when juries will look at that. You know, you see use of force cases all the time in the news and whatnot. Some of them don't turn out very well, but people don't realize as well, though, they're not there at the moment. So you gotta be able to articulate whatever force you use, where was it on that continuum? Was it, you're allowed to use one level of force up from whatever's being used on you. And that's, you one advantage of why we have that belt roll of toys. But that's the continuum, you have to be ever so careful about it. It's real easy to go too far on something that you didn't need to. I mean, if you get somebody in cuffs, you rough them up after that, you're done. You see what I mean? So, but anyhow, the force continuum is something we constantly go over, and that's something that has to be trained regularly.
How much courtroom experience have you had? How many times roughly have you given sworn testimony in court? I'd say it's probably under 10 times. I didn't handle a lot of felonies, but the ones I did, usually they worked a plea deal because the evidence was really good. The same thing with misdemeanor citations. Most people accepted what they did wrong. So I spent very little time in court. There's maybe, it's under 10 times, I'm sure, I've given testimony.
Can you explain what role the county commissioners play in the sheriff's office and how you and the sheriff's office will function within that role? The county commissioners in Montana set the budgets for each department within county government. They're also responsible for ultimately the personnel management of all the employees with the county. I worked with the county commissioners a lot when I was the undersheriff. There was sometimes we didn't agree on things, but you know, that's going to happen in government. But I think it's in the public's best interest for everybody to at least try and work things out, because if you don't, the public is who pays for that. And I don't think the public elects people who are going to, you know, fight like junior high kids. And that's what happens. You see it all over the news. It happens all the time in these other places. Look at Washington, D.C. right now. I mean, people in this country, I'm one of them, are just politically fatigued with the inability of elected officials to get along with each other. And, you know, that may mean working some extra hours. That may mean having to compromise on some things you really didn't want to. But at the end of the day, you have to ask, what's in the public's best interest? So that's how I would handle that.
Get down the bottom here. What is your experience in working with other law enforcement agencies, state, federal, and tribal? Well, I'll start with here. We work quite closely with the Thompson Falls and Plains Police Department. We're always interacting. We're on the same computer system, so all our reports or whatnot. We interact with Hot Springs, probably not as much as the other two. The Federals, we really did some repair on that with the mostly Border Patrol. The relationship wasn't quite that good when we came in. But we actually have a really good working relationship with Border Patrol now, to the point where if we pick up an illegal that they want, they literally, I'll hold them and they'll be down within hours to pick them up. So it's not somebody that I have to throw in the jail and sit on for days at a time. I think the longest we've had to wait is about 4 hours, and they're down there. We have a good report with the FBI, even ATF, and as a firearms dealer, ATF has been very good for a long time, trust me. But actually, the guys at come up out of Missoula. They're actually pretty squared away. They're not out trying to take people's guns for the most part. And sometimes we have some really bad guys that federal law will get them out of here permanently. And so we work well with them. But yeah, I enjoy working with the other agencies. We just don't have enough manpower. So if other agencies and even the feds, sometimes. But when we get more people to come in and help us do the job and get the bad guys out, we work with us.
Can you explain the Brady list and how you would handle any of your officers who are on it or could possibly be subject to it? The Brady list is a list, a prosecutor's list. It could be any prosecutor's list. It's semi-private, but it's for sure that they make a list of officers that have shown to be dishonest one way or another, and they keep that list so they don't have them testify in court because that can be used against them if they were dishonest before. It says, how would you handle any of your officers who are on it or could possibly be subject to it? I'd prefer not to have dishonest officers.
What is your training and experience in law enforcement leadership? I kind of already have gone through some of that with my different levels of certification and, you know, when I introduced myself, 31 years as of July 1st is how long I've been in law enforcement. The leadership part was the 10 years primarily as the undersheriff. Also during my career, I've been a field training officer, which is leadership. Field FTO is what field training officers abbreviated to. When you hire new officers, they have to go through training, and that was one of the things I established within the sheriff's office was a recognized formal field training officer program instead of just, you know, the old days of here's the keys, can you work night shifts and you're on your own. Now it's evaluated daily, and you know those are it goes for different phases. And so, you know, in addition to the administrative stuff I did for the 10 years as undersheriff, I've also had occasions to train other officers outside of that administrative leadership, which is you're basically the first line supervisor when you're an FTO on somebody.
How much training and experience have you had at hiring and or training other law enforcement officers? Can you tell us briefly about the hiring process? Hiring wise, I've done more here. Obviously, in my previous sheriff's office, I wasn't in a position to do the hiring. Hiring is miserable. Trying to find good candidates that are willing to come to this area for the pay is unbelievably difficult. And unfortunate, we probably round file 3/4 of the applications. Just red flags all over the place, half of them don't even qualify. So hiring is extremely difficult, especially in this area. As far as training, I was also for almost 20 years an FTO, field training officer in my previous sheriff's office. And it's extremely important. I mean, if you will, and I've seen it, if you have a field training officer that is got a bad attitude, you might say, guess what you get from the training? It's just like you get a little carbon copy of that person. So field training officers, you got to pick those people well, and they've got to create good deputies. bad in, bad out, you might say, if you get the wrong field training officers. As far as I said, I was on SWAT, training is immense. There's a lot of young men that want to go into SWAT. It's all fun and games and all high-speed stuff, but they just don't cut it, because that's, to them, they've left the police officer behind, and now they think they're, special ops in the military. SWAT's fun, but we have a lot more restraints in SWAT than a military operation is. I mean, you should never be out there just to kick butt and take names, you might say. So training was huge there, and we had to weed people out of SWAT. They finally got their major goal, but they just weren't cut out for it. They had the wrong mindset for that kind of operation. It's the same thing with deputies. If carrying a gun and driving fast is what you think being a cop is, that's not the truth. And that's the field training. Training those new deputies and police officers is huge to make sure that you don't turn out somebody like that. So, I've had a lot of experience in training. I'm going to say it was almost 20 years as a field training officer.
I think these are the last two questions. Tell us what you believe is the difference between being a law enforcement officer and a law enforcement administrator. I always use the word peace officer because we keep the peace. I think what it's trying to ask, and Rupe's here, so I think you have to make sure that your officers have the tools they need to do the job, and they're supported in doing the job and making the right decision, sometimes in split seconds. So that's the difference, is being on top, you've got to support all your guys. You've also got to lead by example and be out there with them. I think that's probably what I would say.
No genie.
Here. What is currently the most pressing problem facing the Sanders County Sheriff's Office, and how will you address it? Being in my role there, I may not be able to tell you what the actual most pressing problem is, because I'm a patrol deputy now. I don't see things in the entirety as I did when I was the undersheriff, so keep in mind the answer that I give might be coming from some of those lands. Right now, what I see is a logistical issue with coverage and the size of the county, given the calls that have gone up since the whole COVID disaster hit, and people have moved in. Our population has gone up, and anytime you have an increase in population, you have an increase in calls. That's just the way it works. And a lot of the things we had done up to that point helped, like I said, putting the laptops in the trucks. One of the things I would like to do is put remote workstations, substations in the county for officers who are covering different areas, and I'll explain my rationale behind that. So here in Hot Springs, you have some officers who live over here, but they may not work over here all the time, and vice versa. If they're off, your coverage may come from somebody who's lives in Knoxon or Track Creek. So they've got to drive all the way over here to cover this area for an entire shift. And it goes the other way too. If it's somebody that lives over here that's covering for a Heron guy when they're off, or a Knoxon guy when they're off, not having a place to work in the middle of that shift means if you're trying to put together any kind of a serious case that involves plugging in body cameras and plugging in, to printers and doing all this different stuff, that you have to lay all this stuff out to put a case together. In January at 2 a.m. in the morning during a blizzard, the tailgate of your truck or the dashboard of your truck in Hot Springs is not the best place to be doing that. What I have, looked at, what I would like to do, and I was headed down this path as the undersheriff, is work with our commissioners and convince them we need some office space in each of these county road buildings. The county already owns the ground, they already own the building. Can we just invest in some building materials to put these offices in? Because the other logistical problem that you run into is when you have an officer who is trying to cover the Hot Springs area and he lives in Knoxon, he's either not going to be here that much and not be available that much, or he's gonna have to run back to Thompson Falls to work on some case he may have picked up on that end of the county. So at best, you're gonna get him respond when he gets a call over here. So this way, if there was a place they could work and do their job, they could remain in this area, stay focused on their cases, put these things together, have everything they need to work here in this area, and it would limit the trips and the wear and tear on the trucks and the fuel spent driving to Thompson Falls. And that would work with serving civil papers too. You know, I've already talked with my prospective pick with undersheriff about this, about us, him and I, splitting the county in half, and once every couple of days, I would take the civil papers to be served to the west end, he would bring them to the east end, so officers who live in those areas could check on duty, go to those offices, get the civils, take them out and serve them, and then stay in that area and not have to drive them back to Thompson Falls all the time. So the logistics of coverage is is probably my best answer to that question.
Thank you. I think that's all the questions, which is amazing because we had planned to go to phase 2 at 5:15. So even though I was very good at writing the questions, or they were very good at answering them, I'm not sure in keeping to the time. And I want to thank them. They kept to the subject very well, and I think they all gave some very good answers. And I want to thank the audience for being attentive and listening. What we want to do in phase 2 here, we thought about how to do this so you all get to ask questions of the candidates. And we didn't want to do this asking just one at a time or something like that. So we thought we would have them divide up into tables. And Lanny, I think, has a table over there. We can separate these tables. And then what we want is for you to feel free and come up and ask your questions to the individual candidates. And that way you get to meet them. Quite often, if you're like me, you only get to meet, you know, the cops when you're going too fast or something like that, right? So you get to meet them now, and you can ask them what questions and get to talk to them. So if you guys would like to divide however you choose to, that's acceptable to you? Okay. So don't be shy, they're here for you.